Good morning, JSU, Lehman College, Notre Dame, and Purdue. Today, we're coming to you with a very special video. It's the Friday Quiz Explained. I know a lot of people were a little bit disappointed in the grades that they made last week, but that's okay. Being disappointed just means that you care about your grade, which is excellent. So, we're going to go over all of the questions so that hopefully this week we can come in with much more confidence and full force so we can ace this thing. So, let's look at the data. Overall, the average person in the class scored about 60 or higher. As you all know, if you check School Runner, you'll see that your grade is a little bit higher than it was on the day that you took the quiz. And that is because I realized at the last minute that I only gave you 9 questions when you should have had 10. So I went back and changed the way that the system counted your points. So a lot of us have higher grades than we had on Friday. So this does not represent what people at Creo can do, okay? And we know that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back, we're going to regroup. We are going to have a little bit of a study session right now so that we can be prepared for this week's quiz, which is pretty much similar questions to what we had on last week's quiz. These will not be the same questions as last week's quiz, but if you watch this video and if you study your quiz from last week, and if you watch the videos that I've given to you guys to study with on Google Classroom, you should be just fine for the quiz this week, okay? So this week, we want to try to get a class average of 85 or higher, okay? Meaning that 85% of us will get a score of 85 or higher, okay? And we can do that. I know it seems a little bit defeating from last week, but guess what? As long as we go over it and as long as we're putting forth the same effort that we've always shown, we're going to do this, okay? So I need everybody to get hyped up because it's going to happen. So before we get into the questions, I want to give a quick shout out to all of those who actually did really, really well on last week's quiz. Each of the people on this screen right now made an 84 or higher. So shout out to Lila, Nadi, Muhammad Gulam, Tahir, Nicole, Alicia, K-Rod, Robert, Malachiah, Michaela, Alexa, Alex, Unique, Abduli, Gio, and Jose. Some of them even made like 96s, and in some cases, the highest score, which was a 108. So congratulations to all of you, and we hope to have more names on the screen next week. So let's get into these questions. The first question says, blank are made up of living and non-living things. If you said ecosystems, you are correct. The key thing to remember is when we are talking about ecosystems in this unit. When you're speaking about an ecosystem, you're talking about a space where there are living and non-living things. If you don't have both living and non-living, it is not an ecosystem. So if we know the answer to that question, then this question should be super easy. Blank describes a scientist who studies ecosystems. If we know that an ecosystem is made up of living and non-living things, then a person who studies an ecosystem has to be an ecologist, okay? Whenever you see ologist at the end of a word, then you know that's someone who studies something. So since we're looking at ecosystems, then it makes sense that a person who studies ecosystems would be an ecologist. Notice some of those same letters are in both words. Question 3. Animals eat food to get blank. Now, Notice we've been talking a lot about energy and how it's passed from animal organism to organism. Okay. Whenever you see those food chains, those food webs, we're not just talking about what eats what. The most important part of it, when something is that when something gets eaten, it's eaten so that we can get energy because we need energy to survive. So animals eat food to get energy. All right. Because without energy, there's no way that an animal could protect itself or be strong. And ecosystems doesn't really make sense. Okay. So make sure that you're reading these questions because most of these answers are pretty surface level. Next, let's jump into questions 4 and 5. True or false? All matter that an animal eats is added to the animal's body. We know that has to be false. Okay, we know that it's false because when you eat food, part of it is made into energy for the animal. The remainder of it is passed out of the animal when it poops. Okay, now a scientific term to use other than poop, we could say creates droppings. All right. So part of the food that an animal eats is used for energy in the animal's body. The rest is in droppings. It leaves the body through droppings. The next question says, ecologists observe ecosystems and draw conclusions about them. The reason why we know that this is true is because we had a similar question in question number 2, which said, blank describes a scientist who studies ecosystems. Okay, we know that that's an ecologist, so it makes perfect sense that this should be a true statement. Ecologists observe ecosystems and draw conclusions about them. Question 6. What is the most important way that matter moves through an ecosystem? Remember, all of these things relate to one another. The way that matter moves through an ecosystem is by eating. Okay? Whenever you eat, when an organism eats another organism, then that matter is moving through the ecosystem when another animal comes around and eats that animal. Okay? So if you have grass that's eaten by a rabbit, and then you have a snake who eats the rabbit, then energy is being moved from the grass to the rabbit to the snake. Okay? Each time an organism is being eaten, energy is being provided to that next animal, but matter is being passed. So that's something that we need to keep an eye out for. So eating is the correct answer. Now, question 7 is where some of us were having difficulties. This is an example of A. A lot of us are not really grasping the idea of what's the difference between a food web versus a food chain. In a food chain, you're talking about energy that's being passed from organism to organism in one direction. Okay? So here you have a leaf, you have a caterpillar who's eating that leaf, then a chameleon who eats that caterpillar, then a snake who eats the chameleon, and the mongoose who's eating the snake. Energy is being passed in one direction, and we know that because the arrows are all going in one direction. That direction is showing what direction the energy is being passed in. So the energy is going from the leaf to the caterpillar to the chameleon to the snake to the mongoose. Okay, again, it's not necessarily just about what eats what. The most important thing is, where is that energy being passed? So if the energy is being passed in one direction, then that means that it has to be a food chain. Question 8 is very similar. Okay, you have an acorn, a mouse, a snake, and a hawk. It says in the example below, the mouse is eaten by the snake. What is the mouse passing to the snake? If we understand question 7, that energy is what's being passed from organism to organism, then this should be an easy question. So the answer is energy. Energy is being passed from the mouse to the snake. Question 9. This is an example of a... Now, we know that this cannot be a food chain. This is a food web. The reason why we know that it's a food web is because energy is being passed in multiple directions. A food chain is very small. It's very simple, like this and like this in question 7. Notice the picture is way smaller and energy is being passed in one direction. But in question 9, energy is being passed in multiple directions, okay? All of the energy is not going in the same direction. So this has to be a food web. I hope that that everyone is getting a better understanding of the difference between food chains and food webs. But in case you're still struggling, we're going to play a little game. Food chain or food web. I'm going to show a picture and you are going to answer out loud whether or not it's a food chain or a food web. Let's get started. Is this an example of a food chain or a food web? I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it. Notice the maize is being eaten by the locust. Locust is being eaten by lizard. Lizard is being eaten by the snake. So it looks like energy is being passed in one direction. So if you said that this is a food chain, you were correct. Next one, is this a food chain or a food web? If you said food web, then you are correct. Notice the energy is being passed in multiple directions, okay? So we have some arrows that are going this way, others that are going the opposite way. So this has to be a food web. When you have a food web, you have multiple food chains placed in the same picture. Food chain or food web? If you said food web, then you're correct. Again, energy is being passed in multiple directions. So this has to be a food web. We have multiple food chains placed into the same picture. See, we have the corn the energy from the corn being passed to the grasshopper. Then energy is passed from grasshopper to rat. And then from rat to the python. You have your mangoes being passed to the fruit fly being passed to the dragonfly. Energy from dragonfly is passed to the thrush, and then from the thrush to the eagle. So these are multiple food chains placed into one picture. So this is a food web. Last one, is this a food chain or a food web? Yeah, this one is a little bit trickier because you have a lot more animals or living things in this diagram. But if you said a food chain, then you are correct. The way that we know is because energy is being passed in one direction. Take a look at the arrows. They're still going in the same direction, even though we have a lot of different living organisms here. And also, there are not multiple food chains in this diagram, so we know that it has to be a food chain. I hope this helped. Please make sure that you study. Remember, you have this video to study with. You also have videos that I posted on Google Classroom yesterday that go into this a lot further. and you also have your answers from your quiz. Again, the quiz will not have the exact same questions as the one last week, but the content and what we're learning will all be the same. Okay, so please do not forget to study. I want everybody to make sure that they're taking their time and doing this so that we can get that 85% or above passing rate. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope everyone has a productive day. See you guys in office hours. Bye.